Hello, EN 112 students. This PowerPoint and video is supposed to help you understanding causal relationships and also correlation and coincidence. So the first question really is, why are we doing a causal analysis paper? And these topics that I listed on this slide show different topics that you might encounter in other classes, not in English. And although they may not seem to be causal analysis, every time we ask questions of why is something happening or what will happen if we do this or that, those are examples of causal analysis. Now, let me give you two examples. One example is that when you push this domino, everybody knows that the effect will be that all the other dominoes will fall. This is one example of a simple cause and effect relationship. Every time somebody pushes the dominoes will fall. And it doesn't matter who pushes the domino, this is going to be the same effect every time. This kind of simple causal relationship only happens in the physical world and in biology. However, if somebody asks the question, why is this child having a temper tantrum in a grocery store? The explanation is not that simple. I'm sure every parent would like to know what causes the child to behave this way, but the causes are very complex. They might be different in this one case, but if we wanted to explain why every child might have a temper tantrum, that might be a completely different issue. So bear that in mind that there are some simple causes that only appear in the physical or biological world. And once we move into the area of human behavior or technology, then the causal relationships are more complicated. First, you should decide if you are analyzing causes or effects, depending on your topic, and sometimes it's easier said than done. So, someone might want to say that, okay, if somebody lacks physical exercise, then that might cause obesity. But other people might want to say that, no, it's the other way around. Obese people lack physical exercise because they are too fat, they cannot move without inconvenience, or they are too embarrassed, and that's why they don't exercise. This is called reciprocal causes, or we might also use the term sometimes causes and effects create a vicious cycle when the causes and effects kind of work in a cycle. Now, there is one example that I took from Laurie Arvizo Alward's 1999 book, and she was the first Navajo surgeon who actually performed surgery on the Navajo reservation in the 1990s when the so-called Navajo plague hit the Navajo Nation. This is what happened. Many patients had headaches, cough, runny nose, so they were sent home. Everybody thought this was just a simple flu. But after a couple of hours or days, these patients had difficulty breathing. And then finally, their blood oxygen level dropped dangerously to hypoxia, their lungs filled with fluids, and they died. So the cause of death was determined as acute respiratory illness, but nobody really knew what happened. So some of the doctors were worried that maybe something went wrong in the previous surgery, but they didn't find anything. Then, of course, these deaths hit the news, and some news reporters blamed the Navajo lifestyle, that it's insanitary, they live too close to animals, and they don't keep their houses clean. Of course, the Navajo tribe also had their own response. No, it's the tourists who are bringing in the disease. There were some crazy explanations that there's radioactivity in New Mexico. There were some nuclear experiments going on. So everything under the sun was brought up because nobody really knew the real cause. So at that point, Laurie Arvizo Alward who was also a Navajo, asked Huntali, who was a Navajo healer, a tribal medicine man, and the healer's response was that there is lack of balance in nature. He basically said that there's too much rain and too many piñons. Piñons are pine nuts that grow on pine trees in New Mexico. So Albert, with all due respect, could not make sense of this, and she tried very hard, but she was really puzzled. Well, after a few weeks, the Centers for Disease Control conducted some autopsies, and they found that the cause of these mysterious deaths was a hantavirus, which is inhaled from mice droppings. And all of a sudden, the medicine man's explanation made a lot more sense. Yes, there was too much rain. There were too many piñons or pine nuts that the mice really like, so the mice population um, was actually extremely large, and that's what caused this disease, which is also a good example of how sometimes one explanation that seemingly doesn't make sense, like the medicine man's explanation, it was right, correct, but he used a different language. Basically, in Navajo belief, diseases are caused by a lack of balance. So this is more complicated, but just some food for your thought. Now, how to approach your cause and effect analysis. Your book tells you don't jump to conclusions. Please appreciate your limits. So some of the causal analysis topics that I gave you are naturally complex. We don't really know what causes bullying, but if you can give a couple of reasons in your essay, you have done just fine. In any case, when you are trying to explain the causes or the effects of something, provide sufficient evidence for your claims and use expert sources. And avoid faulty analysis, so do not attribute a causal relationship to a issue that is more complex. So there are some examples. Just because something happens after another, there's no necessary causal relationship. Head Start programs are very successful, but do they explain all academic success? Violence in movies probably is one of the reasons why people get violent these days, but do all horror movie lovers get violent? Again, this is not like a domino. Not everybody who watches violent movies becomes violent. Same thing about guns. Not all gun owners turn out to be violent. Having said that, some control of some guns would not be completely unreasonable. Chapter 5 in your book also gives different types of causes. They call one cause a necessary cause. For example, chlorophyll is a necessary cause of photosynthesis. Plants that do not have chlorophyll are not able to photosynthesize. Again, FBI defines terrorism as an act of killing innocent victims based on their fanatic belief of religion or some social theory. So, if there is no fanaticism, religious or social, then we can talk about mass killings, but no terrorism. Again, in legal terms, sufficient cause means that if one factor is in place, like somebody is drinking alcohol while driving, that's a sufficient cause for arrest, even if that person may not cause an accident. Precipitating causes are causes when one thing leads to another. For example, Rosa Parks in 1955 in Alabama refused to give up her seat in the white section of a bus, and that actually led to the civil rights movement. Proximate causes are causes that meet the eye. So a student plagiarizes and fails the class, but every time this happens, I'm trying to find out the remote or deeper causes. Why did the student plagiarize? Did the student have too many jobs, didn't have enough time to write the paper? Is the student taking care of sick parents, or did the student take a vacation in Cancun, was unable to finish the assignment in time, and copied and pasted an assignment? Reciprocal causes we already mentioned. Sometimes the causes and the effects form some kind of a vicious cycle. So stress might cause stress eating and obesity, but obese people also stressing about their weight. So that's a vicious cycle, or a more neutral term to call this is it's a reciprocal causal relationship. Contributing factors is a good phrase to use when you are examining complex issues like school violence or bullying. There are several factors that contribute to this, but not one of them is a complete cause. The availability of guns, divorced parents, or dysfunctional families, video games, or bullying might all lead to school violence. Finally, let's talk about correlation and causation. Correlation basically is a statistical coincidence of two seemingly remote events. So, for example, somebody who apparently had too much time on their hands plotted the occurrence of autism and also the available organic food sales figures, and they found that there's a very close correlation. It's not 100%, but it's pretty close. However, is this really a causal relationship? Does autism cause an increase in organic food sales, or does the increase in organic food sales cause autism? When there's no rhyme or reason, then we can just say that this is probably a coincidental correlation. Another name for this is spurious correlation, because it looks very close, but still we have no other common sense reason to assume that either one of them causes the other. Statistical correlation, however, is not to be taken lightly, because statistical correlation is used as evidence for possible cause-effect relationship in human behavior and many social trends. So, for example, the effectiveness of medication or the effectiveness of any educational method can only be based on high correlation, but it's never 100%. So you will never find 100% correlation between, say, homeschooling and social awkwardness. In some cases, yes. If the correlation is high enough, then we might assume that there is some kind of a causal relationship, but it's never the same as the dominoes. Don't forget. What is coincidence? Coincidence is when two things happen at the same time, but there is no rhyme or reason. So, all women's problems begin with men. Does this mean that all women's problems are caused by men? This is just a joke, but pretty much we should not blame men for menstruation, menopause, mental breakdowns, um, even though all these words begin with the word men. Another example, which is even more spooky, is that in 1903, two persons were found with the same name, and even their photographs were very similar, but these two persons were not related. This is a long story. If somebody is interested, you can do your research. But after this event, or after this example, criminal justice began to rely more on fingerprints to identify inmates, because they figured out that names and photographs are not reliable to identify criminals. Finally, the structure for your causal analysis paper. You should introduce the paper explaining why the topic is important, then provide a thesis that lists causes and effects you are examining. Then you can provide some history or definitions as needed, and then provide the supporting details one paragraph each, finally wrap it up